Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a very, very special guest today, Allison Wang. She's the Externship Director and Clinical Professor at GGU. And she's on today to give some really, really useful advice to students. One of the things, before I let Allison speak, one of the things that really stood out to me about Allison is that she really genuinely cares about students and gives a lot of practical advice. And I thought that was really cool. And that's what actually sparked me to even invite her to be on this and to create content with her because she posted a post on LinkedIn that I thought was super practical. And I thought, wow, this is something that students can take and can actually act on and actually hopefully gain a lot of value from. So I thought, wow, we should create some content together. So that's how this all started. So Allison, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you for that introduction. I am really happy to be here. This is my 6th year teaching at GGU. I started there as an adjunct professor teaching research and writing, and then I was offered a full-time faculty role as externship director. And in that role, I get to do exactly what you were talking about, which is teach lawyering skills and help students gain the experience that they need to be competitive, practice-ready lawyers after graduation. So everything that I do, my focus is very practical. And this past year, I was also incredibly honored to step in as interim director of the Office of Accessible Education, which oversees the Disability Resources Program for the entire university. So it's been a busy year.
I bet. One of the things that I'm really interested in is about origin stories. So I'm really interested in how you got into the role, how you got into the field, and what made you passionate about helping the next generation of young lawyers.
So that's a two-parter for me. How did I get into the field? My interest arose when I was a law student. I felt like back then we were really expected to just know how to build our legal careers, just be ready to practice, how to network, when to network, what goals to set, how to go out about getting experience. But for me, it was really a big mystery as a law student. There were always some students who seemed to just be in the know, but I mostly found out about things in my 1L year through word of mouth, essentially through my network. And that is what got me thinking, law school is a place where we build lawyers. And lawyers aren't just like routine researchers, brief writers, litigators. We need, to be truly practice ready. We need to be skilled counselors. We need to be teachers. We need to be listeners, relationship builders, and we need to do it all with practical experience under our belts. And there isn't always a roadmap on how to do this. So I really wanted to be able to provide that piece of the puzzle. So that's how I got interested in this. But how did my passion for this really develop? That's sort of a story. So my dad was a lawyer, first generation lawyer. And he was, before he was a lawyer, he lived in the Midwest. He was the first person in his family to want to go to college and then on to law school. So our family emigrated to the United States. They ran markets and still do to this day in the Midwest. And so when my dad wanted to go to college, it was a big deal, but they decided to humor him and let him go. But after he went to college, he came back.
What inspired him?
I'm sorry?
What inspired him? Was it classmates or friends or
That's a
mentors?
great question. He was inspired by wanting to use the law to help people. He was really interested in the law. He was intrigued by it from a young age. And he realized in college that he could go further. So he decided to go for it. And unfortunately, his family wasn't supportive. They didn't understand why he wanted to go off and get more fancy education. This was back in the late 60s, and going to college was a big deal if you came from a working class background. And then to go
Because
on.
you're not working and it costs money.
Exactly. And, if you take this time off, then what are you doing to help the family? So it was a little bit short-sighted in some respects, but they really, they really felt like he should be back where back in the mix working, and he felt like he should be an attorney. So he went to law school. He got into John Marshall in Cleveland, and to nobody's big surprise, he failed out in his first semester. And back then, when you don't do well in your first semester of law school, there isn't a program of academic support for you. There aren't counselors there to help you diagnose what went wrong and to get you back on your feet. Instead, that was it. End of the road for him, right? But my dad was always a resourceful person. I think one of the skills of being a lawyer, especially if you're a first generation lawyer, is grit. And he had that. He was going to be a lawyer. And so he applied to every law school that he could find in the United States. And the only law school that would take him in was Golden Gate University School of Law in the night program. And so
Wow.
he picked up, right? He picked up his family sight unseen. He'd never been to San Francisco, and he came here, and that's where he graduated from law school. But the thing is that all of his life that I can remember him talking about the practice of law and sharing that experience with me is that he would always tell me how hard it was, how he didn't have the resources that everyone else had, that he felt cut off from networking, from relationship building, from having the ability to just pick up the phone and comfortably ask somebody a question. And that really stuck with me, that his lawyering experience was one that was basically lawyering on hard mode, right? He didn't have the resources and he didn't know how to get them. And so for me, that ignited the passion to be able to provide those resources and those plans and to be able to help the next generation of lawyers really be able to step into their roles with comfort, and having the tools that they need to do these things.
He didn't have the benefit of LinkedIn or any of the numerous resources that I'm sure we're going to be talking about here shortly. Wow.
That is true.
So with respect to this difference between these differing experiences, how can we assist first generation law students?
That is a really great question. And I think to answer that, we also have to talk about how the first generation experience differs for first generation law students. And you hit the nail on the head with feel belonging, right? Belonging is one of the ways that first generation students feel a little bit shut out from the traditional experience. If you're a first gen law student, you are often also the first of many other firsts in your family. And you likely don't have the resources, family resources to explain application processes or how to do a personal statement, how to prepare for standardized tests. You might not know when or how to apply for certain programs or scholarships. And then when you actually get to law school, you might not feel like you fully belong because everybody else seems to know what's going on and you're not sure who to ask about mentorship, about networking, about career opportunities. And I think that a lot of times it can really increase your sense of isolation and your lack of belonging when you have to ask for that help all the time because you feel like everybody else already knows how to do this. And so that asking for help is going to show that you don't really belong here because you don't know what everybody else seems to just effortlessly know. And then on top of all of that, there is really incredible external and internal pressure on first generation students to succeed. And I think this can also really increase your stress and your anxiety because there's so much importance on doing this right, yet you feel like you're doing this without a guidebook. And so how do you provide that guidebook? One of the things that I think is really important is for faculty to just really understand the challenges that first generation students face, and to let them know that they aren't alone and that they are welcome to reach out and talk to them. For instance, as a professor, I try to share my story about my dad as much as possible so that students can relate and will feel more comfortable in reaching out.
It's an
Uh,
awesome story, and it's so cool because now you teach it, GGU.
it is such an honor for me to be able to teach there. It's a labor of love to be able to come back to my dad's university to basically, the formative moment for him, which allowed him to become a lawyer and actually have access to the profession and get to teach there. It's really amazing for me. But some of the things that we can also do and that universities are doing now, which I think is great, is supportive programming for first generation students. So some universities have centers dedicated to this. I think Hastings has a center. And then GGU has the LEAP program where they provide support and, most importantly, to your point, the opportunity to build community among other first generation students and really start that networking process. One of the things that I do in my class that is unique and that helps increase belonging is to create networks for the students in my seminar. So at the midpoint in my seminar, students will get paired with an attorney who's selected for their area of interest. And they will do a salary negotiation exercise with them. They'll get one-on-one feedback with that attorney. But after they do that exercise, all the students in the class come back together. It's like a seminar of about 15 students. And then all of the attorneys who served as evaluators have already agreed to be part of the students' network. So they introduce themselves to the students and then invite them to connect, to reach out for mentorship, and to consider them part of their network. And so that network will always include GGU alumni, first generation attorneys, and then attorneys who are working at the top of their game in different areas of the law, so that students really have this mix. And then they have the opportunity to reach out to this pre-made network that has been created in that class. Additionally, at the
Is that LEAP or is that different?
I'm sorry?
Is that LEAP or is that different, that seminar?
This is through the externship program. So this is
Oh,
what
I
I
see.
do with my program, because I
I
want
see.
to make sure that from the outset, students are able to start participating in networks and having these relationships that they can start authentically building.
That's wonderful. And this goes along kind of to my next question, which is in terms of resources that are available to students for networking. And you've already touched on a few.
Yes. I mean, I feel like there are more resources to learn about networking than there is time in the day, right? And I also find that when you say the word networking, I don't know how you felt as a law student. How did you feel when you heard about networking?
So a great question. So I a number of things. Quite honestly, when I heard the word networking, I didn't even really think to do it on LinkedIn or on social media. So I was in law school in 2009 through 2012. Um, so social media was definitely there, but as far as professional networking, it wasn't really on my radar. And so when I hear that term, what I remember is I remember that meant you would go to events, you would try to reach out to other alumni, you would go to alumni events, you would do anything you can to put yourself out there and to meet other attorneys that shared some commonality. And I think the easiest commonality is where you went to law school. So that's a really, really easy way to connect and to quote unquote network. But networking it's a very loaded word because you never know where the next opportunity is going to come from. So it very well may not be from another lawyer or from a fellow alumnus. It could be from a friend of a friend who knows somebody who has um, knows a company that needs a lawyer or that needs to bring in someone in house. There's all these different ways that people get and land work. And so um, I digressed a bit, but to your question, I think in when I was in law school, it was very much in person.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the traditional way of networking, right? And I find that when you talk to students about networking, the first thing that they kind of do is go, "Ugh," it's it's anxiety producing. One, because a lot of students started law school before the pandemic, so traditional in-person forms of networking were, considered to be one of the main ways to go, like you were talking about. And certainly when I went to law school, that was the way you did it, right? You went to events. And that can be really scary. You can feel like I have these expectations, but I don't understand the purpose. And so what kind of resources are out there? There are different layers of resources. The first thing that I always recommend is looking at maybe an entry level book about networking, because what you first want to do is figure out what networking means to you. It's different for everyone. For instance, I'm an introvert and I have severe hearing loss. So going to a traditional event is a little bit difficult for me and I'm not as effective at it. On the other hand, there are forms of networking and relationship building at which I excel and that I really enjoy. So that's the first thing you have to figure out is where do you fall on the networking spectrum? So once you've looked at some articles or books that explain how networking works and what types of things are out there, you can make a plan. Once you've done that, that's where the expanded realm of resources really comes into play. First and foremost, your career office is the best place to start if you're a law student and you want to get into networking, but you're not really sure where to start, because your career counselors are going to be able to explain this to you and help you put together a plan. If you're at GGU and you want some networking tips, you can also come to me. I'm a great resource and I love talking about networking. But I think what Amir, you probably wanted me to talk about more is the digital social media aspects of networking and the resources that are out there for you. And these are free, available at, any time. And you can really pick and choose what resonates with you. So I recommend looking on LinkedIn, and you will start to see that there are a lot of thought leaders out there who talk particularly about networking on LinkedIn, how they do it, what kind of mindset you need, what kind of plan or tools you need to really excel in this area. You can start following professional marketers. There's a legal marketing association made up of people who do nothing but strategize on how to build these relationships in the legal industry. And there are lots of folks who post about networking tips, tricks on a daily basis. One of the things that I'm actually working on in the coming year is to teach digital networking to law students. I really think it's the frontier for lawyers. And I think that it is one of the more important ways that you could really build authentic relationships without having to physically go to a bunch of different events where I think it's a little bit dicier about who you're going to interact with. This is much more targeted, much more intentional, and it has a lot more opportunity.
I'm so curious and interested to talk more about what you mentioned before. Actually, believe it or not, as much as I appreciate the importance of social media and all these tools, I mean, I think that the reason why they're so invaluable, I think, is that they're free and widely available to all your students. And so many attorneys and practitioners are going to be on these networks. And so it's a great opportunity. But to your point earlier about going to, let's just say, in some form of networking, going to an event, that can certainly be overwhelming or intimidating. So I'm really interested in understanding about planning and the purpose of it and how you identify what that means for a student. And the reason why I say that is because I think that regardless of the forum, whether it be in person or over social media, I have the sense that that feeling of intimidation is still going to be there either way, regardless of the forum that the student selects.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that that sort of feeling of intimidation is, it's what holds us back from networking and makes it seem like such a scary proposition, because human nature is very much focuses on the negative, what you've lost. And so when you reach out, let's say you send 20 emails out, 20 cold outreaches, you're looking for attorneys to have coffee with or to talk to and get some mentorship, and only one responds. The way that you will start to think about it is, oh, only one person responded.
Uh,
And you're going to focus on 19 losses instead of one incredible opportunity to build an authentic relationship with somebody. And you forget that that one relationship, if you nurture that, then that could lead to 5 way stronger, more authentic relationships than 19 superficial responses that you got. And so I think that part of the intimidation factor is the way that we think about things. And if we focus on if we focus on the interaction and the rate of return, I think that is always going to be intimidating, right? Because you're always going to get fewer responses than invitations that you send out. But if you focus on the quality of the responses that you get, suddenly you are wildly successful and it's not as scary.
that's I think that's so important. I think that it's the glass half full versus half empty mentality. And I think that one of the number one pieces of advice that I give to all new grads is just the importance of being positive and thinking in a positive manner. Because to your point about, well, what's the goal? Okay, well, every student is going to have a different goal with networking. But I think that across the board, and maybe this is a huge generalization, but I think that in general, regardless of what your goal and objective is with networking, at the end of the day, if it involves other people, if where you want to get to involves other people, then positivity is going to win, because people want to be surrounded by people that are positive and have positive attitudes. And so
I agree.
it ties into what you're saying about, if you got to focus on, oh, well, one person responded, that's great. I just have an opportunity now to maybe have a really meaningful connection with another practitioner or another, whoever it is that I'm reaching out to.
And that's another thing is that we're always taught not to be vulnerable and not to admit any weakness. And reaching out to start a relationship is definitely a vulnerable place to be. And I think it's okay to own that. So if you're intimidated because you think when you reach out, you won't know what to say or how to start things, a really great way to start things is to say, hey, I, as a new law student, I am still really new at this networking thing, and I'm feeling a little nervous because I was concerned that I wouldn't know what to ask you. And that enlists the other person as your partner. They want to help. And I think that can make the conversation a little bit easier if you show a little bit of that vulnerability and some curiosity at the beginning. That's another way to navigate initial feelings of intimidation, is to have the mindset that these conversations, there aren't any stakes involved here. We tend to, as humans, again, when we invest something like our time or our effort, then we expect a high return. We're looking at the stakes. And so that makes us nervous. The higher the stakes, the more nervous we are about the interaction. But if we come in with the mindset that there aren't any stakes involved here. This is just a conversation. This is just an opportunity for you to be curious and ask questions, and that this will go where it goes. It's, you don't have to have any preconceived notions about what's going to happen. It makes it a lot easier to loosen up and to really embrace your curiosity and start giving the other person the opportunity to answer questions and to start getting invested in the learning part of the conversation instead of the transactional piece of the conversation. And there shouldn't be a transactional piece, right? That's the other piece about networking that I think we don't teach enough about, is that networking implies that you are going out and taking an action. But really it's more like relationship building. What can you learn and what value can you add? And when you think about it that way, it's a lot easier. That's sort of the way that we operate on a regular basis, right? In your normal relationships, what can you learn? What kind of value can you add? It's what you do when you're in class as a 1L. You may not think that you're networking, but by offering a moment of kindness to a classmate or sharing your notes or being supportive, you are showing that you're someone who adds value, someone who is kind, who can be relied upon, and you are building a relationship. And that relationship is going to pay dividends later on down the road, even if that classmate isn't in the same area of law. Somewhere down the road, they're going to need to consult with a bankruptcy attorney, and they're going to think about the person who they trust or who they remember kindly, and they're going to reach out to you first.
And that could be something as simple as just listening.
Yeah.
If you listen to someone at the right moment, when they really, really need somebody, that can go a long way.
It really can. As a 1L, so one thing I didn't tell you about my father is that he passed away when I was a 1L.
Sorry to hear that.
So he never got to see me become a lawyer, but it was a really rough experience. And the thing I remember the most to this day is the kindness of my classmates, and some of the classmates who reached out to me, who just stood up and said, "We don't know each other, but if there's anything that you need, just let me know." Some of those people are my closest friends today, and people that I rely on and who I would refer to unequivocally.
That's incredible. Yeah, one thing you never know where someone is in their life and in their journey, and so that it just goes back to me. It all circles back to the importance of staying positive and just trying to provide and push positive energy back into the world. And some people need it more than others at any given time. But if you're always trying to conscientiously put out positivity, I think that it'll just pay enormous dividends in the long run. And you don't know how you're going to impact someone else's life. So it's great that you had those wonderful law students around you and classmates that were willing to be there. I know that competition can sometimes bring out the worst in people.
I agree. And I think it's one of the things about law school is it's tough because there is a sort of unspoken message not to be vulnerable and not to show your weakness. And I think that's actually a mistake. I think it's okay to be vulnerable sometimes and to share when you need something, when you need support, for instance. And when you don't, that can lead to extreme anxiety, loneliness, and that's a problem in the profession.
It's a big problem.
Yeah.
I think that's where all the strength lies, is in having the courage to be vulnerable. Because as you said, I mean, it's like showing up and being present and putting yourself out there. That takes a lot of courage. But I think that's where you're going to reap all the biggest gains ultimately. So we talked about a little bit about social. I'm really interested also in again, this question is a little off script, but in terms of the resources of for helping students figure out, okay, what does networking mean for me? Is that very career driven or very? I assume it would be, but maybe that's too simplistic.
Um, are you saying that, how they choose to network will be driven by the industry that they're in?
Right.
Um, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I do think that there will be some networking norms, depending on what industry you're in, but I think that when you're talking about the authentic piece of relationship building that really underpins your networking, that that is something that isn't industry specific. And as lawyers, you may change industries over time. You may decide to be a non-practicing lawyer. There are so many different paths that you might take after you get your JD. And I think looking at it as, industry driven or, specific, like driven for, a specific purpose is probably a mistake. You really want to be looking at your relationship network as something that provides value to you, and something in a place where you can provide value and show up for other people. And when you are thinking about it that way, then the relationships that are right for you are going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing that, and you touched upon it before, but I should mention it. I think that because I certainly do a lot of networking and did before, and one of the things that I find in terms of, well, okay, I might be intimidated to go into this crowd of people that I've never met before, but one of the things that I like to do is just focus on trying to learn maybe one thing, because if you can learn something from an exchange, hour long worth length, anything, just a event, or whether it be through maybe a social media event, whatever it may be. But if you're putting yourself out there, if you can learn one thing, to me, I take that as this was worth it. This was a net positive. I learned something, and it could be something mundane. It could be about, oh, I didn't even know that city existed. You can ask, oh, where are you from? Maybe that's what you learned in that interaction. But these things, I mean, they just add to your knowledge, even if it may not be what you practice or what you want to be practicing in. I still view it as a net positive, and so that's one piece of practical advice for law students that might be intimidated is just focus on trying to learn something. And I think if you go into situations like that, that might help take the, oh, I need to get this person's contact information, or I need to meet this person that might be able to introduce me to someone that's hiring for this position, or whatever networking means for the student. I think if they focus on just the fact that everybody has a gift and everybody has something that they can teach you, then I think that might be a tool for just reducing the anxiety that's associated with networking.
I could not agree more. I mean, I think being curious is one of the things that is really helpful. And I think um, when you focus on that, again, you take yourself out of that realm of transactional, right? It's more of, an authentic conversation. It's more about just learning about the other person. And I can say that some of my best networking experiences weren't networking experiences at all, where I met attorneys in different situations, or we talked about Thai cooking, or some other thing that was an area of interest. And from that, we discovered that we liked talking to each other, and we continued the relationship. And then we turned to talking about, more traditional legal things, but that's not how we started. if I had gone in, with that goal in mind, I think things would be different in those, in those particular relationships. So I don't think you have anything to lose by being curious, by looking at things as, just an opportunity, rather, a positive opportunity, like you said, Amir, rather than something that has high stakes attached to it, or where there's a set script that you have to get something or say something. Think of it more, and this is hard for me as an introvert, but I do think that when you think of it more as this, just opportunity to talk with somebody and learn a little something about them, things really open up.
Definitely. I love your Thai cooking example, because I just couldn't agree more that it's just when you find that commonality with somebody, then you could have a real conversation that is really may not even be premised at all on so-called networking, but it's a real connection, and one that can be long lasting and meaningful. With respect to some concrete tools, so I'm really curious as to at GGU, do you guys provide tools in terms of how to use concrete tools like LinkedIn or other social media um, to help students connect with potential employers? Or I'm just curious in terms of what sort of concrete advice you guys have for students with the tools that are at their disposal, that are all free too, which is amazing.
I do believe that our career office will talk with students about ways to use LinkedIn. I talk with students about ways to use LinkedIn. In terms of just the basic ways to use LinkedIn, I think that some of the prevailing and important information that students need to have is, have a good profile picture. It doesn't have to be a professional picture, but it needs to be a picture that shows your face and gives somebody just kind of a sense of who you are. Don't neglect to fill out your about section. I think it's really important. You don't get as much, people don't spend as much time as you would think on your LinkedIn profile. And so some of the ways that you can draw them in is by having an engaging picture, having an about section that says, enough about you that draws someone in, that they want to skim it or maybe take a deeper look. Other things that I think we provide as tools is just explaining how to professionally show up on LinkedIn, what the network provides, what the purpose of the network is, and what kinds of things you might want to do on the platform. I think that basic information, though, is, while it's helpful, I don't know, I think it just scratches the surface of what is possible, which is why I'm going to be working on this in the coming year, because I think that we need more instruction on using digital marketing tools and digital relationship building tools.
And I'd love to be a continued part of that if I can be of any sort of help.
You know what? So this is what I love about you, right? Because you are, curious, and, this is an area that it would not have occurred to me to reach out and ask you about, but now that we've had this conversation, I would very much like to talk with you more about this.
Thank you. And in terms of some high level practical tips that I think will, I'm sure, resonate with your students, but I just want to say that there's a lot of lawyers out there that really, really like helping students and really like being there, whether it is to listen, whether it is to provide input, whether it is for advice. There are a lot of practitioners out there that, if students reach out to, will get a positive response. Now, again, to your point, Not everybody will. And by the way, sometimes lawyers are busier at some times than others. So in your situation where you had 19 people that didn't respond, some of those might be in very challenging, maybe trial situations where they're just not going to get to their LinkedIn messages for a few weeks or possibly months. That happens. So that's another thing for your students to keep in mind. But lawyers love also talking about themselves and what they do and what they've done. And so, in terms of intimidation, I think that one really, really easy way to quote unquote break the ice, and I'm sure this is something that you teach your students, but just do some really simple Google searches on the person that you're interested in possibly connecting with, and then just query them about what they've done, or something that they've done that just show interest in anything that they've done. And that's a really, really easy way to start a conversation. And that doesn't even need to be on social media. It can be it could be in person, or whatever medium, whatever networking means. That's something that they can use and apply. I could give it a quick example, but I had a student, one of your students, reach out with a paper that she had written based on a video that we put out. And obviously, I mean, it's just flattery, right? I mean, I was like, oh, wow, this is wonderful. This student not only watched our video, but she also took the time to write me a nice email, and then even went on and sent a paper that was on point. And these things go a really long way, right? And so it's just, to your point, right? It's about creativity and just having the confidence in knowing that there's people out there that will be receptive and that are going to want to reciprocate and put out positivity back in the other direction.
Yes. You know what? I have to say, Amir, I love your videos, and probably everything I know about intellectual property comes from those videos.
Thank you.
I stumbled on one a long time ago, probably when you first started posting them, and I was instantly hooked. I really like them. And I think that they're engaging. They explain things to people like me who might not understand everything, but really want to know about some of the issues that are in the news, or just concepts that I think are really important. And so I watch your videos all the time, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate it. And Victoria, I couldn't do it without her. She helped set up this live stream, and she's incredibly invaluable in helping us produce that content. In terms of the final hot takes, I mean, do you have any parting shots that you want to share? Any final thoughts? I mean, I think for me, I think that the relationship building, community building, I mean, that was my main takeaway, I think, and resonates with me 100%. I think that's what networking is. But yeah, there's any final thoughts?
I do. I have a couple of quick things that I would say. We did talk about all of the different, considerations that go into making networking less intimidating. And we talked about the ways that you can find resources once you've settled on the type of networking that you want to do. But there are a couple other resources that I want to highlight, one of which is organizations, student organizations, and local and affinity bar associations. So I'm on the board of the Minority Bar Coalition, which is made up of a large portion of the affinity bars in California. And one of the things that I noticed is that students are not fully participating in these organizations. And that is a shame, because in addition, and I've posted about this on LinkedIn as well, in addition to getting either free or heavily discounted membership while you're a law student and a new lawyer, discounted as a new lawyer, not free. You have access to their networking events, to mentorship programs, to job boards, scholarships, and all kinds of events where you can learn lawyering skills, or you can learn about different areas of the law, and which you can use as a springboard for networking. So I have posted the link on my LinkedIn page, but if you want a list of every single bar association in the state of California, you can go to the California Lawyers Association page, the CLA page, and then click on the Bar Relations tab, and you will see a link that will get you to this list, and you can use that to find different organizations. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is
This is amazing. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no. The other thing is that, Amir, we touched on using digital networking, ways to reach out, but we didn't talk about how to actually accomplish that outreach. And so one of the things that is important is to have a script that you can use to reach out. And the script should have a couple of things that make it easy for the person who you are reaching out to respond. Someone like Amir, who is very busy, may have a trial schedule. He may not be able to reach out, to every single person. And so he's going to reach out to the people who make it easy for him to respond. So in your message, try to keep it short. I recommend that you follow something similar to this. Introduce yourself, explain why you're reaching out, make a clear ask. You want coffee, you want a mentor, you are looking for information, whatever it is, make a clear ask. And then last, make it easy for the person to accept. If we have time, I can give you an example of what one of these scripts would look like.
Please.
Do you want me to do that?
Please, right, absolutely. This is amazing.
All right, so here's a short script that would work in almost any situation. Dear Amir, I am a first-year law student at GGU who is very interested in intellectual property law, particularly patents. I am hoping to intern at a law firm like yours next fall. So you've got something clear, reason why you are reaching out. I saw your LinkedIn Live discussion with Professor Wang, and your comments about the value of networking really resonated with me because they motivated me to create networking goals for the upcoming year. Would you be open to meeting me for a 20-minute virtual coffee on Zoom in the next 2 weeks? I'm free Wednesday through Friday, 9:30 to 11, this week and next week. If one of those times works, I can send you a calendar invite with meeting details. Sincerely, networker. So
that's perfect. Yeah.
Easy, clear. It doesn't take a lot of time to read. You don't have to do any guesswork.
How can I say no to that?
And then it makes it easy for the attorney to respond. And then the last thing I'll say is,
on the scripts, do you recommend, so in terms of helping students be efficient, so do you craft multiple scripts and then sort of cross apply them depending on who you're reaching out to, or it kind of just depends, I guess?
I think it depends on what you're reaching out for. So, that's just an example that includes all 4 of the elements so you can see how they are put together. But depends on what you're going to be asking for. Just make it easy, short, and clear, and make it so that you don't have to have a back and forth for that person to accept. And then the last thing I would say is, anytime that you build a relationship, just like in real life where you see somebody sitting across the classroom from you and you think they look kind of cool and I'd like to get to know them, any potential relationship involves some inherent risk and vulnerability. But if you held yourself back from reaching out every single time it was risky or you felt a little bit vulnerable, you would live all by yourself and you wouldn't have any friends, any, relationships at all. So, don't focus on the negative aspects. Focus on the potential. And every interaction is not going to lead to a new relationship. So the ones that do lead to that relationship, focus on those and developing the value in those, because for each relationship that you build, that is going to yield more relationships from that interaction. And each of those are going to be valuable and authentic because they came from a strong relationship that you built.
That was so beautifully said. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for being on. This was really, really valuable.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to let students know that I am open to connections. I respond to anybody who reaches out to me. Feel free to message me, connect with me. And I've posted social media plans, experiential learning plans, all sorts of different tools on my LinkedIn page for students so that they can take some of the mystery out of these things and make things a little bit easier.
Awesome content, by the way. So useful. I just love how concrete and actionable your content is. So thank you for putting that out there.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you.